Hello, and welcome to A Campus Conversation. I'm your host, Sam Fritz. Campus Conversation is a show by and for college-age individuals. It is meant to provide an unbiased medium to advance the conversation surrounding topics in the media today. Each episode will feature the voices of students, recent alumni, and working-class people of the younger generation. The purpose of this project is to move on from the constant loop of conversation that social media puts in front of us. It aims to present the topic from all sides as opposed to just one. In order to do that, I owe you some transparency. I must be honest in that I'm not approaching this first episode from the typical, or a lot would even say proper, journalistic viewpoint. I am using friends and people that I am personally close with to gather their opinion. While the aim of the show in the future will be to gather opinions from all over the country, currently I only have available to me a certain audience with which I can borrow from. As the show gets bigger and expands, I want to talk to people who I've never even met before and get opinions even deeper than those I was able to grab for this first episode. But until then, I have to go off of a volunteer basis, and I did reach out to people who I know. A lot of the students that you will hear from attend Shippensburg University, where I myself am a senior. With all that said, it is up to you as the viewer, or the listener, to put your trust in me that I, as the producer of this piece, did not influence the outcome of their responses whatsoever. Now, moving on to the format of the show, I'm going to take audio clips from each interview that I conducted and play highlights from each one. Hopefully, you will see that not every audio clip is the same. There are differences in opinion, differences in viewpoints, and you can also see the similarities in which conversation might better be furthered. The first and inaugural episode has to do with gun control. After the Parkland shooting, it has once again been brought to the forefront of the news cycle. While the events of the Parkland shooting are what inspired this to be the topic for this week's episode, the piece as a whole is going to refer to gun control and not just strictly recent events. First, and in my opinion what has been talked about the most since the shooting, is whether or not we should arm teachers or have armed security guards in the schools of our children. This is what fellow students had to say.
Well, when it comes to teachers, I think it's a little ridiculous to want to, give them guns, and the only way for it to realistically, in my mind at least, be acceptable to give teachers guns is to have the school district or the county or whoever would be in control of that kind of aspect to go out and individually buy teachers guns and then give them training. But that being said, then it's a little ridiculous that the government would then be willing to go out and buy guns and get training for everyone, but not be able to supply them with whatever they need to teach. And then when it comes to having a security guard, I don't think it should necessarily be a very high-profile thing. I know some schools have security officers, like, maybe one police officer there or something. But the idea that I keep seeing floating around is having veterans who are, home from being deployed or something like that and are looking for jobs, and have them kind of step into that role, because I'm almost 100% positive there is nothing more that a veteran would love to do than show up and protect a big group of kids.
Okay, arming the teachers, definitely not. Because most teachers, they're not signed up for that. They'd have to be trained. They'd have to go through a lot of training process. You'd have to provide them with a gun. And a lot of teachers don't feel comfortable doing that. To require teachers to do that, I think is a little bit excessive. If teachers have the option to do it, I still don't like the idea, because I don't think that a teacher in the spur of the moment is going to be able to stop a criminal from shooting up a bunch of people. So I don't think that teachers having weapons would solve the problems. As far as security guards go, I might be a little bit more for this, depending on the cost of it and depending on how effective it could possibly be.
I do agree with having security guards and armed security guards as well. I don't see that as being a problem, because that's specifically what they're trained to do. Teachers are there to teach, and they shouldn't have to have that added responsibility to also protect. They can protect in other ways, but I don't see it as helpful to them. I see it as actually hurtful because, like, that's not their job. That's not what they're there to do. And they need to focus on educating our youth and not necessarily just having a gun and knowing how to use it. And you just can't completely trust them to do that. But a security guard, that's their job, and I think that's okay.
Here at Shippensburg, I study economics, and an important thing about economics is whenever you, especially when it comes to policies like this, you always have to take in not the cost. Oh, it's easy to say, oh, it's going to cost someone $12 an hour to just stand around and make sure no one shoots up the school. Yeah, 12 hours an hour, 8 hours a day, 7, maybe 5 days a week, months, years. That adds up, and I think in a position where schools in a lot of places are struggling to fund certain programs that the community want to be funded, I just don't see security guards being a realistic expectation unless maybe the townships themselves are paying for it rather than out of the school's pocket.
Teachers get frustrated too, okay? And the last thing I want to hear is a teacher was armed and then the schools I went to, freaking students sometimes fought the teachers. What is the teacher going to pull out a gun and say, "Oh, I had self-defense"? No, let's. There's a lot that can go on if a teacher had a gun, and then also the training for that. I've heard. I'm not going to say who said it, but I've heard. People are interested in training these teachers as well as giving them as guns. I'm not a fan for it, I'm not a fan for it. We barely pay teachers what they deserve for teaching us. Now we expect them to go and get, I don't know. No, I'm not a fan of it. I was going to say, but the security guard idea, that's I can see that. That's viable. That's worth it.
So I went to a high school that actually had a armed police officer. We had a security officer, not a security officer, an actual police officer who's had an office in our school. He's the resource officer. He was armed. I definitely can't say for sure that it made me feel any different about the possibility of a shooting occurring because he is only armed with probably a 9mm pistol. And in the event where a shooting would occur, more than likely what is being brought to the fight is something substantially bigger, larger magazine, larger bullet, more damage, more carnage. I think it could benefit in certain circumstances, but at the end of the day, you're asking teachers, not to say that some of them aren't already willing to risk their lives, all teachers to basically sign up to be willing to risk their lives for all their students. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it's going to add something new to the job description that most teachers didn't sign up for.
So, about 15 years ago, there was actually a shooting within my own school district. I believe I was in kindergarten, and it occurred in the middle school, and it happened to be between a 7th grader or an 8th grader at the time and the principal. He shot the principal and then shot himself in front of everybody because they used to congregate in the mornings. From that, we now have a police officer for the school district, and I'm absolutely okay with police officers with guns being in the school or security officer. And I'm also, for the most part, okay with select few teachers having guns within a classroom, depending who they are, what training they have, because I think any teacher with a gun needs the qualified training to be able to have that in a classroom.
Okay, so you say that you did have a police. Was it an actual police officer or it was just a trained security guard?
Actual police officer. We used to have they were called resource officers, though, from the school district point of view, but we used to have one for the junior high and one for the high school, and now we just have one for the high school, but he circulates the district if need be.
I absolutely think that we should be arming teachers and security guards in school. Personally, my mom's a teacher, and the thought of having, me knowing that there's a school shooting going on, and if it's at her school, I would be terrified if I knew that she had, no way to defend herself, and there was no one that could help her. And I think, personally, the only way to combat somebody, this is a cliche statement, but, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I really personally believe that. And if we can arm teachers and armed guards, you can stop something from happening as opposed to leaving them completely defenseless in a school.
In gathering these interviews, I normally forgot to ask the first question that would come to mind for most people. I forgot to ask their general thoughts on the Second Amendment. So, if you haven't already gathered their opinions yet, here they are for you. This is where the interviewed students stand on the Second Amendment in the modern context.
Again, referencing Jim Jeffries, she says that amendment was made when we were fighting with muskets. And you remember the skit where he says the great thing about a musket is it gives you a lot of time to calm
think.
down.
Yep.
Yeah, great joke there. But in all seriousness, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. I think that, when people say, "Oh, we just have to take guns away from everybody," well, do you know who you're not going to be taking guns away from? Criminals.
Mm-hmm.
My brother is a Marine captain, and he's and he lived in near Camp Pendleton for a long time. And there was, and L.A., certain parts of L.A. can be really, really shady at times. As soon as it gets dark, the real weirdos come out if they're not already out on the street in certain areas, especially the part where he lived. And there's been certain circumstances where he's been approached, taunted. People have demanded money from him, and he just warns them, "I just want to let you know that, I'm carrying." And he said that people have backed off.
Yeah, so the thing is, the biggest thing people give is the Second Amendment, and a lot of people kind of hold that any kind of gun regulation is violating the Second Amendment. And the biggest argument that people give in favor of gun control is the right to a well-regulated militia, and there are arguments for that the Second Amendment was written in times of muskets. The Second Amendment was written in things where it doesn't really necessarily apply. One of the issues I have with this, arguments on both sides, is that the Second Amendment it was written for a reason, but people act like just because it was written by the Founding Fathers that it's therefore necessarily correct and anything cannot be done to change that because the Founding Fathers said it. Well, the time the country was made, we had slavery. We've changed since then. We've changed a lot of other rules since the country was founded, even if the Founding Fathers might have disagreed with that. A lot of Founding Fathers were for slavery, and we obviously decided not to do that anymore. So therefore, I don't think that just because the Founding Fathers supported the Second Amendment doesn't mean it's automatically correct, doesn't mean it's automatically doctrine. And I think that if we have to change it, even if it's in violation of the Second Amendment, to keep people safe, I think it's still worth it.
We have the right to our guns. We have the right to protect ourselves from intruders, to protect ourselves from the government, to protect ourselves from wild animals in the forest. If you feel like that's your right, then go ahead and do it. I'm totally not opposed to people having guns. I'm opposed to all the death that's happening. And it's happening a lot from guns, so I don't know. Something needs to be done there. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, we have the right to bear arms, but I also think people should not own a gun unless they have the proper training. And in the state of Pennsylvania, safety courses are not required to own a gun. Just a background check, the wait period, and then you can purchase a gun for essentially the most part. But within my own household, my dad would not ever let us. I don't know the code to our gun safe at all. And I think that's a smart idea because as children, they are emotionally unstable, and that's not wise to have access to. I think guns are okay because we have a huge hunting area in the state of Pennsylvania, and I grew up in a huge hunting area. But I think every person that's wielding a gun needs that safety training, which I don't think they always receive.
Private citizens should be able to protect themselves, and they should be able to concealed carry and everything like that, as long as they're doing it appropriately, as long as they have the appropriate background checks, they've been trained to use weapons, all of those things. I don't see a problem with defending yourself and defending your family. We have guns in my home, and it's never bothered me, it's never scared me, anything like that, because I know that my parents know what they're doing and they've been trained to do it, and they've gone through the proper everything they need to go through. But yeah, I don't really see it as being a problem, but it just needs to be done appropriately.
I personally believe that everybody has the right to carry a gun if they have the correct permits. And I'm honestly all for like a really good mental health exam, or perhaps like more like re-ups of permits. I think everyone should be able to defend themselves if something should happen, like Parkland. It's really scary. Think about it, like if you're in a situation where, you know, someone has a gun and you don't have anything. But if you did have a gun, then like you'd be able to defend yourself. Like Parkland, like I said, like the good guys did have the guns and didn't do anything. So what if teachers or like staff inside the building could have? I would assume that they probably would have used it.
After correcting my earlier mistake in forgetting to ask their general opinion on the Second Amendment, we moved into a different conversation, one about mental health in schools. I asked the interviewees to remain mostly within the realm of middle school and high school, but allowed them to bring up any personal experiences they themselves might have had with the subject. In this case, mental health applied to both the mentally disabled and to people who have experienced bullying and depression.
No, not at all.
Can you expand upon that?
Me personally, from my own experiences in middle school and high school, I was bullied a couple of times, and I knew if I ever went to like the principal or anything, nothing was going to be done about it. It would be just a slap on the wrist. It didn't really care about where you were at mentally or anything. And
It's complicated due to the fact that not everyone with a mental illness is going to commit a shooting. Not everyone who has a mental illness will commit a crime. Now there is a very large trend of people with mental illness in the criminal justice system. It's very common, so much so that it is talked about as me as a criminal justice major. We talk about mental illness in the criminal justice system at least once a class, every class. Like it comes up so often because it's so normal. So the issue is how we tackle those problems. The way that we can prevent these issues is by assisting those in need, by not just by preventing them from getting guns like that, but to get them help, to have those people get the assistance that is required for them to become a regular citizen before they commit those heinous crimes. It's just, I definitely think it's neglected in America. It's something that we push under the rug a lot, and then when it breaks out in these violent manners that just grab everyone's attention, that's the only time we talk about it. But then a month later, it's back under the radar, just to be forgotten about again until another tortured individual commits a heinous crime.
I hate to say it, but no, I do not think so, because school counselors, for the most part, I feel are just there for their students academically. I know there was a issue when it came to things such as bodily harm when I was in middle school, and they didn't really do much. They just kind of accused my friends that got caught up in the scandal, whether they were or were not. It's just rumors started flying around. And then there were individuals who needed that mental health care, and I feel like they did not receive it. And I feel there's usually only one psychologist per school, and then with that you have your counselors, and I feel the counselors are only there for academic help.
I think it's a bit of a combination of mental health, but also a desensitization to these kinds of violent acts. And I feel like the role that mental health does play is obviously very apparent because of the links that it has to the shooters and the mass killings and everything. And the only thing I could really say towards that is that there are always signs. No one is ever, 100% perfect, and then all of a sudden they do something like that. So there's always going to be something that any person can realistically look out for.
I remember when I was in 3rd to 5th grade, I was picked on all the way up until like freshman year. I think by the time, at least these days in high school, like when people get to high school, they kind of get over the whole bullying thing. Kids will still be mean. Like, kids are always going to be mean. People are always going to be mean. But I think once you get to high school, the bullying thing plateaus off. But I remember 3rd to 5th grade, I had to eat lunch in the guidance counselor's office a lot because I was picked on that bad. And I just remember, like, this is just my own personal experience from years ago, but I just remember being told, oh, kids are just kids will just be kids. And this was the guidance counselor telling me this. And I just remember thinking, like, oh, man, I'm going to hate the rest of my time. There are days where I was picked on the bus. I would beg my mom not to get on the bus. I hated being on the bus because I just hated, as soon as I walked in, like, insults would just be thrown. I was hit a lot. I could just never get a break. And I just remember the school not really doing anything for me in that sense other than just telling me it's going to be okay. They kind of leave out the fact that maybe kids don't want to be included, and I feel like they pressure these kids into fitting in when I never heard a school, or at least my school, say it's okay if you don't want to fit in. Like, it's okay, instead of pressuring, like, oh, like, yeah, it's okay to be yourself, but schools will never say, like, it's okay to be yourself and not be like anybody else.
The schools are handling people like that, because for me, growing up, I particularly never recognized anyone mentally unstable. I had these weird friends that, would say some crazy stuff, and you just, they're just a little odd, they're a little weird, but you never thought they were mentally unstable. I don't know, maybe I never thought about it. And the second part of this is I have a brother who's autistic, so he was diagnosed young. I never, like, the way they handled him, because he's technically mentally not all there. So, like, the way they handled my brother, I don't like the way they handled him either. Not from a standpoint of, they were not teaching him anything, but I was very uncomfortable with the way they handled my brother. I didn't feel like my brother in itself was safe from the freaking bullies of the school. So I didn't even feel my brother was safe in that environment. So I don't know. There's a lot to be improved with the school system.
It's always been focused on that, and I've never, until I came to Shippensburg, I've never experienced counselors that focus on other mental health issues in schools. Because, kids can go to their teachers and say, hey, I'm being bullied. Not a lot's going to get done. Not a lot's going to get done about it. And even if something does get done, it's often just discipline for the students that are doing the bullying. And there's no fallback on making sure the kid that was being bullied is okay. And a lot of times those kids don't want to go to their teachers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, being in high school is a totally different atmosphere than being in college like we are now. You're kind of more confined to the same students every single day, the same teachers every single day. It's like an atmosphere that you can't escape, and you're doing it every single day for you're with those people for the entirety of your life at that point. I went to a school in Mechanicsburg, and there was a boy that committed suicide when I was in 10th grade. And, I mean, how do you begin to help someone with mental health if you really don't know that they have these issues in the first place? I mean, it's a huge issue with elementary through, maybe not elementary, but like middle school through high school kids. Like, you're really developing and coming into your own, and if you feel like left out of the group, like, I absolutely see that being a problem, and mental health is like such a serious topic these days.
Another topic often covered when it comes to gun control is the availability of weapons. Sometimes people debate whether or not a person should be able to buy a semi-automatic rifle like the AR-15 that is popular amongst mass shootings, or whether or not they should be able to even buy a handgun, which takes more lives per year than the semi-automatic rifle. Interviewees were also asked if they believe the background checks were doing a sufficient enough job in keeping weapons out of the hands of criminals. These are their responses.
Times that murders are committed, when you think about it this way, is that those guns often aren't necessarily being purchased legally, and they're not necessarily coming through the proper channels. And even the ones that are, you can't really stop murders. And I don't think that getting rid of guns, like those kind of guns, is going to stop anything. Like, people are still going to find other ways to do it. Like, there's so many other options on how you can kill people, as bad as that sounds. But I don't think getting rid of handguns, shotguns, for the people that do use them responsibly is gonna change a lot. You know what I mean?
My issue is, and what we find to be common, is states have different requirements. And in order for us to be successful in preventing these circumstances, there needs to be a common ground that states reach. Because what we find a lot of the time is people will purchase guns out of state or the states surrounding them because it is easier to obtain, and then bringing them back because they have different rules and regulations in their own town, their own city, or even within the state. It all depends on the jurisdiction. So I think there needs to be a common ground between state governments and the federal government about who we deem to be acceptable to own a type of weapon. I enjoy shooting weapons. I grew up in a hunting family. I've shot an AR-15. I'm not for banning all kinds of guns, but I think there needs to be more responsibility taken as to who should be allowed to own a weapon and when, like in terms of purchasing. I think there needs to be a closer look in terms of the ability to purchase and the ability to take home.
I think I don't know enough about the process to really make a educated comment on it, but I will say people have them, and it's not like a small percentage of people. It's like a good deal of people have them, and it doesn't seem like it's difficult to get. Like if I wanted one, I could probably go get an assault rifle or something like that with no knowledge of how to use it.
I recently, after this Parkland thing, I really think that pushing the age limit back to 21 for buying a gun would be a good decision to go. Especially if you're 18 and you're able to have a gun and you're still like in that high school environment, maybe like still controlled by just the dangers and depression of that high school environment. I mean, like, maybe I'm just wrong, but I don't see many college shootings.
Do you think background checks and safety checks, all those kinds of things, are being implemented enough that we are preventing guns from getting into the hands of the wrong people?
No. If you have to take your physical and if you have to take a permit and have so many hours within a car with somebody else, and then you have to go and take a test with somebody from the state, and then also you have to prove that you're driving your vehicle, what's any different about a gun?
The final subject that I introduced into the conversation was one that comes up not just after every mass shooting, but after shootings in general. Pop culture. Often enough, people relate movies, music, video games, etc. to the glorification of violence. I asked everyone who was willing to be interviewed whether or not they personally felt that pop culture glorifies violence for the youth and for America in general.
Being a problem in other areas, as far as this particular topic goes of mass shootings, I would not blame video games and other cultures like that. So again, I don't think that our culture is the only one that plays video games, and I don't think that compared to other countries, we have a significant difference in like music culture, video game culture, and things like that. So I don't think that's what's making the difference between our culture and other cultures.
I mean, the video game topic, I've heard that since I've been in kindergarten.
Right.
You know, Call of Duty's bad for kids. I personally feel like there is an age where, I mean, you shouldn't have like an elementary school child like playing a first-person shooter game. But I mean, I've played a ton of Call of Duty, a ton of like first-person shooters, and I've never wanted to like hurt another person. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's just sick individuals out there that take pop culture and twist it to fit their own agenda in a way, like it kind of forced them to be that way. Mm-hmm. But really, I just feel like there's mentally ill people, and that's just what they are, and maybe that's like a mental health issue in America. But I mean, if you're going to talk about like rap music being violent, I mean, I would kind of agree with that. But I mean, the people that are also singing rap music, some of them come from like really tough places, and they're coming from a place that is very violent and talking about it, but then a lot of the people that listen to it probably aren't coming from that background. But I just feel if you're mentally ill, you're going to like take advantage of that kind of stuff and have it push you towards becoming violent. But like a person that's rational wouldn't act on it, I don't think.
Yeah, 100% glorifies it. You know, best video games coming out right now are just all about gun violence. PUBG, gun violence. Fortnite, gun violence. GTA, one of the that game came out, what, GTA 5 came out like a couple years ago, 5 years ago, and it's still popping, like it's still popular. Straight gun violence. What else? It's just like video games. Let me switch to movies. Black Panther. That was a great selling movie. Had guns in it, gun dealing, weapon technology. Let's go spread that. I mean, it wasn't the theme of the movie, but obviously you have to include some guns in there and make it a little actiony. Like, yes, we glorify the gun. As my girlfriend once told me. These days society doesn't respect the gun, because guns are deadly weapons. They can kill in lives, and we have it all here showing out like it's a toy. Like, you can just, let me put my hand on the trigger and let me wave it around like I'm not trying to kill anyone. Like it's glorified in games and movies. And
I definitely believe that pop culture does have a difference on how we act and how we talk about these things. A lot of the time you are hearing in rap and everything. I don't really listen to it, but whenever I do, I hear like, oh, I'm just going to go shoot them or whatever. Like, violence is just being brought up over and over again. Grand Theft Auto, you basically just go around in that game stealing cars, killing people, doing whatever. And I think at a young age, kids can be swayed by that. They hear it and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so common. Okay, like if they can do it, I can do it. But once you grow older, you start to realize, okay, this is fictional, like this is not real. And then also you know how to break that boundary of reality and I'm just playing this for fun.
Like, we're humans. I think everybody glorifies violence in their own way. When you have everything from our society glorifies everything and then complains about everything. Like when Future, Lil Wayne, Lil Pump, they all rap about, abusing Xanax, opioids, and then our society turns around and goes, why do we have this problem? Maybe because everybody's glorifying it. And I think it's the same thing with violence.
This is actually something that I had just talked about yesterday. I'm taking a criminal theory class, and criminal theory is all discussion about why we believe people commit crimes. And we had just talked about school shootings or shootings in general, and I'd brought up the culture around violence in America. America has very different views from most other countries about violence, whereas our video games, our movies, our music. But I don't believe that it will turn a random everyday person into a murderer. Because as somebody who, I listen to hip hop, I listen to rap quite regularly, I play violent video games, I watch violent movies, and I have never had the inclination, anytime that I've possessed a weapon in my hands, a loaded weapon in my hands, never have I thought of shooting somebody. I think the issue is people with predispositions, people who have their own issues already, that have already considered these things and thought about that. I think it could potentially push those over the edge. But again, a predisposition, and you can't always tell those predispositions. So you can't just say like, well, ban this and ban that, because you don't know who it's going to affect and how. People are different across the board. I think what you would find as common is those people who commit those crimes are not just your average person that experiences some issues and can come back from. They're people who have issues in different. It's not just people who are tortured. There's issues where people want to be glorified. People don't just commit school shootings and stuff like that just because they were bullied or because somebody made them angry. Some people do it because they want the fame associated with it. They want their name in the news, and that's the thing. It's the mental illnesses that some people have where they want to be glorified, and they will do that to get that glorification. A lot, not a lot of the time, but there's certain instances, and that's why some people are reluctant to release the name or to speak the names of shooters and stuff like that, because it's what they want. They want you to know their name. So it's people with their own issues in their own ways.
I mean, of course, there's some things that kids shouldn't see, and that's why we have movies that have certain ratings. Whether or not those parents rent those DVDs and let their kids watch them. I mean, that happens. But on top of it, you can't filter out everything your kids are going to see and hear. And if they're not hearing it in movies and songs and video games, they're going to hear it somewhere else. They're going to hear it from their friends. They're going to hear it, like, no matter how much you try to filter what they see, they're going to get access to it.
I wouldn't want to say glorifying, but the term that I used earlier was desensitizing, and I feel like that's a little bit better, because it's not that, things are making, like, video games and music is making it good or, fun or enjoyable to go out and shoot people, but it's making it go, okay, well, that's in, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty. There are so many first-person shooters out there, and there are so many games where you can just go around and kill people, and I would, never want the two to be correlated, because of the fact that I also enjoy those games, and that I do enjoy just playing video games in general, and I wouldn't want something that I enjoy to be compromised in that kind of way. But that being said, I do feel like the more people see it, the less they're going to see, a bad side of it.
I think society glorifies it more than what we would think of as like video games doing it, because I know there's research out there that depending what platform of social media you're on, there's different emotions that are posted. So I believe it's either Facebook or Twitter. Usually they post more traumatic things to get more hits. Because I used to play my fair share of Halo and Call of Duty, and I never thought about violence in that slightest form. I almost looked at video games at that point in my life as a way to get my own aggression out.
Lastly, everyone who was brought in for an interview was allowed a last word. Any subjects that we may not have spent enough time on that they wanted to expand upon, or things that I hadn't even thought to bring up that they wanted to leave a lasting comment on. This was their place to do so. It should be noted, though, that not everyone had something to say, so certain voices might be omitted due to the fact that they simply just didn't have anything to add.
Well, I absolutely think it's time where we start to look at our gun laws and just reevaluate things. I'm always one of the people that's a bit on the radical side when it comes to things, and I won't even say radical. I want to say kind of just out there, but I think one of the ideas that I've had is to take, at the very least, bullets away from guns, and maybe get a switch over from live ammunition that can be bought and in any household to rubber bullets and non-lethal ammo. Because if what you're really worried about is someone coming into your house at night and, stealing all your stuff, and that's why you have a gun, if you have rubber bullets, that's going to put someone down. And if they're, not down after they get shot by a rubber bullet, I'm honestly just going to say they probably deserve to have whatever they're taking at that point, because that's a big, scary man or woman, and I don't want a piece of them. But I think it's too one-dimensional of people thinking that we're going to take the guns away, or we're just letting everyone have a gun so that way everyone can feel protected at all times. And I do actually want to reference one thing, which is the season finale, I think, of South Park season 19. And I'm probably getting my numbers wrong, but in the end, the last episode, everyone ends up feeling very insecure about themselves and about what they're doing. So everyone ends up buying a gun, and anytime they have to talk about something, it's always with, everyone pointing a gun at each other, which is a very unsafe and, fairly scary thing to consider, that, the only way we'll ever feel safe is to have a gun pointed at us, but have a gun pointed at the other person as well.
With the way that we've experienced so much gun violence lately, I think people push it so much on the policymakers, and I agree with that. Like, we do need stricter gun laws. Like, we should not get rid of guns completely. I think that makes no sense. But we do need stricter laws, and we really do. And people push it on policymakers so much, but we also need people to just understand, like, how you handle those situations and how we need to help each other. Like, as a society, I think we need to help each other. And when we see someone struggling, it falls on us too. It's not just, let's regulate mental health. Like, no, if I see someone struggling, if I see these issues, help them, report it, whatever you can do. It's just, we can prevent so much if we talk to each other as a society. And people don't. People don't talk to each other. People don't support each other anymore. We've become a nation that doesn't talk to each other. And I think that's a really big problem. And, like, you're still going to get those crazy people that no matter how much you report them, talk to them, it's not going to stop them. People just are people, and that happens. But, smaller instances can be prevented so easily with gun violence. And, if people just had someone to talk to, had someone to help them. And I don't think it's done enough. But
I think that we are just very quick to judge. We're very quick to attack those that would harm others without understanding the situations that occurred beforehand. I'm not condoning the use of violence on innocent individuals, but there just needs to be conversations. We need to talk about these tough issues, these tough problems that we find ourselves in, because without this discussion, no solutions will ever arise.
If I can rent a house, or if I can go legally buy a house at the age of 18, or serve in the military or vote, I want to be able to have my right to own a gun. No, it doesn't have to necessarily be an assault rifle, but a handgun, a revolver, something like that I can protect myself with if need be. I would like that. And also for hunting purposes. At 18, you can go out by yourself. I mean, you can go out by yourself when you're like 14, hunting. And if I'm 18 and I want to be able to go do that without my dad being like, oh, okay, here's my gun, I want to take my own, I think I should have the right to.
I think it's more when it comes to this, people need to keep an open mind because people are traumatized in the sense of the situation. But usually when something like this happens, people go the polar opposite of what's going on. So even, for example, when the student passed away at Penn State from hazing, everyone was like, let's just shut down Greek life. That's the best option. And I think people need to be weary on that because you don't want to just like flip a coin because that's where the divide forms. I think, yeah, there's issues where we need more gun control, but there are also issues of people just flipping a coin and going polar opposite.
I spend my life trying to be happy, but what I have almost every month, not even talking about the news stories of like just mass shootings happening every year and like that. I'm talking about when every single month I have to hear one of my own, someone I knew from high school, someone I knew as a family member, died, not because they got in a car accident. Damn, that's just tragic itself. But I'm saying not because of natural causes, but like because someone decided that they can take someone else's life. That's how I became more invested into it. That's how I became invested into this gun control talk. That's why I have a freaking opinion on it, because it's not just a rare occasion for me anymore, specifically me anymore. It's not a rare occasion to hear someone got shot.
This concludes the first round of interviews for A Campus Conversation. Of course, on such a diverse and complex subject, one episode will not be enough, but that is where you come in. I can't interview the whole world at one time, so in between episodes, talk, discuss, take the points made in this piece and use them to find common ground. My hope in publishing this piece is that you may find that even people with opposing viewpoints can have the same concerns, and together we can work to find a resolution on those problems. In order to do so, we need to take the conversation a step past sharing screenshots on social media and start sharing our own views. Until next time, I'm Sam Fritz, and this was A Campus Conversation.